Thank you all for sticking it out, first of all. This is actually a pretty good crowd for the last session. Most Retina meetings have fizzled down. People are going to have meetings outside at the bar. Last of the Mohicans. Thanks for staying, everybody. I'm excited for this one. This one's always fun for me as a viewer or in recent years as a participant, but I'm going to ask the guys to introduce themselves, and their company, what they do at the company. Jeff, why don't you start? We'll work our way back.
Yeah, thank you, Faraz. And looking forward to the discussion. Jeff Evenson, Chief Commercial Officer at Outlook Therapeutics. We're developing, as you heard from our CEO, Russ, this morning, to kick things off, bevacizumab for wet AMD, DME, and BRVO. And we're excited about that and doing it in a really innovative prefilled syringe that we're really excited about, I would say.
David Atchison with Apellis Pharmaceuticals. I talked a little bit ago around our work with pegcetacoplan in geographic atrophy. Plus, we have a whole number of products that we're working on, both in the ophthalmology and retina space, as well as rare disease. So happy to be here.
I'm Rob Kissling. I'm the head of medical at Bausch & Lomb. I think Bausch & Lomb probably needs no intro. A whole gambit of products from over-the-counter all the way to surgical and RX.
Ram Palanki, I'm Senior Vice President of Commercial Strategy and Operations at REGENXBIO.
And Paul Hallen, VP Global Head of Alcon Retina.
Welcome to all of you. Thanks a lot. We have here then members of companies that we would call large, and then members of companies that we would see as smaller. There's no defining characteristic there in size exactly, but we all get the idea. Rob and Paul are coming from big corporates that have been involved in and around ophthalmology for longer than any of us have been in the business. So we'll get different perspectives, which is kind of what I think makes it more fascinating to hear. I'll start with Rob and Paul. So you guys develop products, you develop drugs, devices, all kinds of things. A lot of that is done by way of acquisition. Maybe you'll tell us what proportion if you can, but in so doing, what looks attractive, what makes an acquisition potentially attractive in the beginning, catches your eye? What are the early diligence points for you? Paul, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we're looking across the board and trying to understand what best addresses the unmet need. And what I mean by that is, in general, the efficacy, the safety, and I think undercalled is the ease of use. There's a number of things that we've acquired that we've had to, re-engineer a little bit, and we have very high standards, so it's not surprising, but I think that's the main thing. And then in the end, it's got to have a good business case. I have a couple of transaction people in the office, so in the audience, so they're probably proud of that comment. So,
what about Paul's stage of development and other things like previous funding, liabilities, royalties that you might become aware of? Do you have thoughts? Do you have deal breakers in there?
No, I really have people that do that. So the guys that are in the audience, they do a great job on the transaction side. I try to focus on the medical aspects, the technical aspects, and of course the business case. And if it's something we want, these guys figure out how to do that, whether it's an option or a number of different aspects in terms of how we do the financial part. So I don't have to worry about that too much.
And you're somewhat agnostic to stage of development?
I like later stage development, in particular when there's multiple companies going at something. So it's kind of hard to see who the winner is until you come around the last turn. If it's something very unique, very disruptive, we'll get in earlier. So whatever the situation is.
That's a fascinating point about and this is off the cuff, but the 2 or 3 different companies doing the same thing, does that make it easier for you to analyze the product, or is it better when there's just one?
I think it's easier when there's multiple ones, but you can get different perspectives on solving the same problem. I go back to Wave Tech and Clarity on in the cataract area where they're approaching it completely differently. And essentially, I think the better technology got second place because they just couldn't execute.
Yeah.
Right.
Common story, actually.
Yeah.
Rob, how about you? Any thoughts on that? And then I have some other follow-ups for you.
Yeah, I think from the viewpoint of a major strategic, we inherit the work that has gone through the entire development process. And what I would say, it's a bit like marriage when you get to our side. And Fred on the last panel mentioned, sexy is important, and sexy is important, but it's sometimes dubious, and we're all susceptible to sexy. But I think it's just like in marriage, it's the boring things that make success long-term or not. CMC, right? Did anybody skip any steps along the way? Basically, was that vision originally conceived to do something that a patient wants or a physician wants, and how well was it conserved along the way? We are open to all kinds of deals, all kinds of deal structures, but the fundamental is, does it do something somebody wants?
How about management? We talked earlier on the previous panel about the importance of early stage management. Do you need to see a certain level of management already in place? Is that a pro or a con for you, given your position that you may have your own management people in place ready to go? How do you view that? And then for both of you subsequently, if you bring in a team that has a management team, what happens then? Why don't you start?
So again, it would depend on the stage of the asset and things like that. But it was articulated earlier, and I completely agree that a lot of it, you just need somebody there who can tell you precisely what this vision is, how well it's been executed, and all of the nuts and bolts along the way. Somebody to clearly communicate. So I think having a strong management team in place initially is very important for that. And again, having a management team, depending on whether they want to sell a company and depart or stay on, becomes a big marriage question. Again, you're going to be wed to these people potentially for the long term. And I've worked in deals where co-promotes get you something extra. And I've worked in deals where there was so much friction between management structures that co-promotes sort of degrade what was possible from the synergy of the two companies. So it's really it's a case-by-case basis.
I totally get that. And I like the fact that you're using the marriage reference. I'm not staying at ASRS because it is a wedding anniversary for me this weekend. And I told Ram earlier that if I wanted to have another one, I was going to be returning tomorrow. So sorry, I won't be at ASRS this year. I have bigger fish to fry. Paul, final point on the management team issue. You bring the team in-house.
Right.
When do heads roll? How do you make obviously you're looking for talent and skill in the marriage, but do you have a premonition about how to do it?
No, I think as we do our due diligence and we start to get in past transaction into the integration, we do a lot of interviewing during the integration process. We understand the talents of the people, how they interact, and we start deciding, who is really, key in keeping and making this successful. So do we let them, work on their own, or do we bring them into Alcon? Also depends on strengths and weaknesses of what's needed at the stage going forward. So each one is unique. We all talk about it, and then we've done it both ways. Like a True Vision, for example, for some time we did an OEM agreement with them on 3D visualization. We let them be very agile on their own, and then eventually we brought them into our process at the right time.
You want to conserve the expertise you just bought.
I agree.
Is sort of how it shakes out.
But you don't necessarily require it as a standing rule.
No.
Let's say in private equity buying ophthalmology practices all over the country now, they of course have the requirement that the principals who sell the business stay on board because they carry the goodwill. This is a little different. So you don't have a requirement one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think you look at retention packages for those key individuals, and so you take each one uniquely and don't have any predefined idea. Be flexible. What's going to work best is what it comes down to.
Great, thank you. Let me turn to the other three guys who are with smaller companies, and I'm going to sort of ask the question in reverse. Jeff and Ram, one of you start. What makes a strategic acquirer attractive to you if you're part of a startup and you're looking for a partnership, or at least considering a partnership? What do you think about the timing? What's attractive about the personnel and or strategy of that company versus what may be unattractive about the timing or the personnel or the strategy? Jeff or Ram, you want to start?
I mean, I think when we think about strategics, you have to think about why are we going for a strategic, right? So the reasons are really you want to take away your financial and operational overhangs. So when you think about that and you're looking at a space, and let's just say in ophthalmology, you want to be with someone that has a global presence, that has a presence in the space that you're trying to operate in, right? Someone that understands the marketplace and someone shares the same views as you. And then it comes down to really talking about, what's the value of the asset and how much can you extract out of that on an economic basis. So I think for any company of our size, you're really thinking about taking away all of those overhangs that come with financial aspects of the business as you're trying to move the product into the commercialization process and operational aspects of the business.
So commercialization would be one of the biggies. Teams in place to market and sell products. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, all of those combined with you need the capital to go through a large development program. Right?
Sure.
So when a partner steps in, both on a financial basis and an operational basis, on an execution front, it becomes all a lot more palatable, especially when you operate in spaces like wet AMD, DR, DME, right? If it's a small rare disease, it's a little bit of a different story. I think there's an opportunity to start thinking about, could you go and do this on your own? But if you want to operate in large areas like now dry AMD,
Sure.
you need that type of partnership.
Yeah. Jeff, same questions to you. And also, what about timing? Extracting, getting the most value for your own investors or shareholders in making that sort of deal?
Yeah, good question. I think as it relates to timing, I think the best time to do a deal, whether it's a license or an acquisition, is when you don't need to do the deal, without a doubt, right? It's because
That's bargaining position.
right. If you need to do a deal, then just everything about it can be unintentionally bad for the company, right? When you're in need of funds, or if it's a moment where you have to bring in a partner in some way. So I think timing, that seems a little nebulous, but I think that would be a general point. And clearly, the closer you get to an approval, the better your deal should be, right? Because you've de-risked the asset or the opportunity. I do think while you're in a space and you want to partner potentially with somebody that's in that same space, I think that would go without saying. But I would be far more interested in ensuring that a company, having been on the other side and having done a number of deals on the other side, that isn't going to ebb and flow with a quarterly P&L that they're obligated to have with your asset. I think you'd have to just ensure to the extent possible that you have somebody that is fully committed in every way that you can design a deal. If it's an acquisition, it's a different story. And I think for us and for anybody in this stage, as a management team, as a board, we've got a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. And our analysis will be, what percentage of the total NPV, the system value, are we getting in this deal versus the acquirer? And it's got to make sense, right? It's got to do more than we can do alone.
And the committed concept that you brought up, is that just a bunch of smart guys sitting in a room trying to figure out the style and the psychology of the other smart guys? Is there a formula, or is it old-fashioned face-to-face business figuring out levels of commitment? And I don't mean dollars necessarily, but psychological commitment and dollars.
Yeah, I think there are ways that I have seen that you can contractually put a priority on said asset. That's pretty extreme, but I think you've got to, I think at the board levels, we're a publicly traded company. At the end of the day, convincing our board that this is a good thing to do by the conversations you have. So I think every situation would be different, but I think getting to that some sense, whether it's contractual or otherwise, you can guard against the downside.
David, same topic to you, but start with, if you don't mind, what about a licensing arrangement? First of all, pros and cons. And if you're in a company that's still private, and you guys have gone to the next level, but when still private, when is pursuing an IPO a better option than a partnership like we were just talking about?
Good question. I'll actually make a comment on what Jeff said.
Please.
So I've been in a company where we had to do a deal, right? And it was highly unpleasant for everybody. As you can imagine, right? Because we were financially strapped. We needed to do a deal to make sure we could move forward. And over time, it didn't work, right? So I completely agree around partnerships or in-licensing. It's got to be the right time. We happen to be at Apellis, we have to be in a lucky spot. We've got an awesome molecule. It's already proven in another disease state. We think it's going to bring a lot to dry AMD or GA in this space with the group that's in here. So what we have to decide is, do we want to do one or not, right? And we're well enough funded that we think we can handle this on our own. And that's what our position has been publicly, at least up to this point, right? So I think the right time, and we've done this in our rare disease space, the right time is to decide, where is it that, for a company of our size, where is it that we need our resources to have the most impact, to be able to do what's right for the patients? And I can tell you, and you guys, most of you know our CEO, Cedric, he's very focused on making sure as many patients can be treated as possible, right? So like in Europe on our rare disease work, we've outsourced and we've partnered our products out to another company that's got a nice big footprint for us. We've already built our teams and we're currently building our commercialization team for GA as we stand today. So it's got to be the right time based off of not being in a hurry and not having to do something. And I think it has to be, if we've got a molecule like the one that we have and an asset that we have, is that really what we want to do? And how do we do it with a partner that can get us there quickly? The one thing I will tell you in partnering, and I think this came across from a few folks up here, I would definitely be looking for people who can bring expertise into space because we are a true startup, right? So we've got the opportunity to do some really great things, trying to find that one or two individuals that can change the dynamics of an organization versus maybe bringing in a partner may be different for us, right? So that's where to find the expertise so we can move quickly to get patients product is the right thing.
Ram, final thought on the timing issue for a public company that's already clinical stage, and we have a few here on this table. What about a strategic partnership for that company? What's the timing that makes most sense?
I think timing is it's mutual, in fact, and even if you want to do certain things earlier, you just can't on a strategic basis, right? So people want to know that the asset has been de-risked, and then they want to measure like what kind of de-risking has happened on a value basis and what kind of value it brings. So, you take all of these components. I think Jeff talked about NPVs. I mean, NPV is a math model where you're applying risk adjustment based on how far your asset has gone and what you think the probability of success is, right? So you have to get to a certain point to do those kinds of risk adjustments where you can extract the highest value on both ends, right? And then it becomes the right type of partnership where you're doing it for the right reasons. And the right reasons are some of the stuff that just talked about is accelerated access to the product, broad access to the product. When you start talking about wet AMD, things like dry AMD, you're talking about 150 plus countries, right? When we talk about a lot of these things, we talk about US, the European 5 countries, and Japan. How do you take this to the rest of the world? So you need that type of infrastructure and partnership to take it to as many patients as possible. So the timing is all about, yes, if I'm in phase 3, my risk adjustment is going to look much better on that NPV model and I can extract more value, right? Sure. So it's a matter of, how far can you carry your company? That's the reason having the roadmap, having clear view into capital needs and being ready for that all the time is going to put you in the driver's seat versus trying to get your product to a place where you're giving away the value.
As an investor, I thank you for those comments. We like that you're looking out for the investors early on in the process. That's always a danger zone for us. I'm going to stay with the same three guys, move to the next topic, sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. How about when things are going badly? The development plan, and this is why I chose these guys because they're going to tell us the truth. They're not going to just hand wave. Development plan going badly for whatever reason. Science isn't coming out. Management isn't working. How do you have early recognition of that problem at a great scale, and how do you deal with it? What's the first steps to take? What's the messaging, and to whom? Jeff, you want to give a start?
Wow. Okay.
It's broad, and you can be
yes.
as specific or as broad as you like, but I find it, as I've gone along in this world of development and investment for me, is this is what we're all thinking about 90% of the time is, well, what if things go badly? And we'd like to kind of know that the people on the other side have thought about it or have some idea of how that will play out.
Well, I would say from Outlook Therapeutics point of view, I can probably use a real example. I mean,
Sure.
Clearly beyond efficacy, safety, formulation, inflammation issues, whatever that may come to surface, those are clear points in which, especially as a publicly traded company, those are disclosable events when things are material, especially when you're a one asset going to more, but initially a one asset company. I mean, you have to disclose that. So those are, I think, pretty quick and immediate conversations. But I would say the background that our company has, before we joined, Terry Dagnon and myself, and Dr. Mark Humana as an advisor, almost 3 years ago, the company was developing biosimilars actually for Avastin and for Humira. And that was the plan. And they IPO'd before all of that or during all that process. And the company discovered, and I think, we've talked about biosimilars today, there's a high cost to getting to market. There are large non-inferiority studies, and you're typically going to have multiple players. The company was at those crossroads. So they had to basically determine what was the next path forward. How do you go from here without proper funding to get it to the finish line? And then, oh, by the way, one of 3, one of 4, biosimilars. How do you differentiate? So the pivot was really recognizing that was not the path forward, and the company took a different strategy. And it was really, Terry Dagnon deserves immense credit for the strategy of how to architect into a retina, wet AMD, DME, BRVO play with the help of Dr. Humine as well. And so that was a very active discussion. As a publicly traded company, you can imagine the tension there. And then to transition and then execute on a new plan, raise capital along the way, get a program up and running. But I'm not sure if this exactly
It totally
answers
answers the question. It's exactly the kind of concept I was getting at. And I hear in the answer, in that instance, there was a direct planned pivot to an entirely different development plan. Got it. David, what do you think about this? I mean, you're also in a public company, but it was private not that long ago. It may be handled differently in different scenarios. What are the first signs and what are the first steps, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no problem. So a couple things that just from our perspective. So earlier today when we talked about the GA opportunity with pegcetacoplan, you saw a slide that had about 15 development products or programs that was up on the screen, right? When I started 2 years ago, there was 2. So we've moved very quickly to get ourselves into some diversification across our rare diseases and then really focus in on what we want to do in the retina space. But there are spots where and just to give you an indicator of how new we are at this, we did our first LRP planning process a year ago. So it took some time to put everyone in a room and really took the long range planning around what we want to do and where we want to put our dollars. For us, there are programs that we have either put on the back burner or completely eliminated because financially to get there, it's not the right thing to do for where we've got a better opportunity, say in GA, to put our dollars and our opportunity with a molecule like pegcetacoplan in the right spot. And I will tell you, so we're still in that developing stage as an organization. So we just ride really what I call close herd on all of the moving parts. And there's a handful of people that are completely involved in almost all of that. And we've grown over time. But you'll be surprised, and maybe not, but you'll be surprised how still involved our senior leadership is. Meetings that I'm in that in most other companies would not be, or a place where I'm sitting, Cedric, Fede, others are very close to all of the moving parts because we have to make decisions quickly and we can't waste the time on the right spots to have the right investment for the right patients. So to recognize it, you have to be close to it, at least with what we're doing in our current setting.
Thank you. Ram, when you're still in the private stage, let's say, and this is happening, and you're at that decision-making point, kind of like a gambler, know when to fold them, know when to hold them, know when to go back into your pocket to win. That's a tough decision. And you're running short on money and you got to decide, is this a time to pivot and try to raise more funds or take the hit? And what do you do? And if you do decide to raise more funds, what's the message? And do you go back to the original investors or are you now out trying to get new investors? What's the strategy?
And I have a little bit of a different view on this because I think the risk assessments in preclinical development versus clinical development once you get to the commercial stage, how they declare themselves and how you assess them is a little different because the technical process and the financial process is different, right? So for me, it starts with, in preclinical from toxicology to pharmacology models that are going to support your IND filing. You have to have a very clear view on those and know what the data suggests and the type of risk mitigation plans you have to have in place to get to your goal of IND filing, right? And once that happens, you're walking into the clinic, you have to have a clear target product profile. And when you're not meeting that in the early, you're meeting or not meeting that in your early trials, you need to have, again, a risk mitigation strategy. And you and I talk about risk a lot. I think the key is how good are you at assessing that risk? And that risk on a financial basis keeps going up as you go through the development process into phase 3 and commercialization. So at some point, as you go through this process, you have to realize if the product is going to meet the target product profile, or do you have to make adjustments to get there? And maybe that revised target product profile, the value might not be there. Then you have to really sit and think through that hard to think about, is this still the right product, right? These are tough decisions to make. I know some organizations do it in a very disciplined way. When you're a large cap, you can say, I put enough money, I can walk away from this. When you're a small startup, you're trying to breathe life into it, right? So you're trying to find ways to move it forward because there's some type of investment that's gone into it. But I think that's the discipline that one has to have to be able to step back, even if you're in a small company, to really figure out where does the product fit, what are the technical deficiencies that are not letting you move to the next step, and be able to address those. And for all of those, again, capital becomes important. I think if you have enough capital, you have the ability to go through these risk assessments and take those risk mitigation steps to keep moving it as far as possible.
That's why, as mentioned earlier on the previous panel, it's important for early founders to raise enough to get to the next inflection point with the assumption that there will be a couple of stumbling blocks along the way that end up costing more. We've all done construction on our house. It never costs what they told us. All right, to the other two guys, same topic. It's a different context for Rob and you, Paul, about how those early signs are seen and how you act on it. You're in-house. You do have the capital, as Ram was alluding to. You have the power to pull the plug. How do you recognize the development plan going sideways, and what do you do at that point?
Yeah, I think for device, it's a little bit different. But I think, first of all, the company you've acquired, the story starts to change a little bit, right? They miss deadlines. They drop features. They do design changes. And I think ultimately the most common one is the COGS goes up so high, it really destroys the business case. And so I think you need to get to the root of the problem on that. But that's when those are the telltale signs.
And how do you, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but how you're not the prosecutorial type, but how do you get to the bottom of it as the managing director? Who are you calling and what kind of questions are you asking at that point?
I think a lot of the discussion is around, okay, here's what it's like in Alcon, a big company, and you've got to, not hide stuff because we can help you.
Yeah.
But if you don't tell us, we can't help you. So you get past that pretty quickly. And then you get into really understanding what the problem is. A well-defined problem is nearly solved, right? And so we can help through that kind of dialogue and really have them be part of the company. Because otherwise they think they're this little agile group within Alcon. No, you're part of Alcon. The sooner, we can talk that way very transparently, I think everything goes better.
So a scientific analysis with the team and yourself and your team to lay out the problems very clearly and then make a decision and even at times to pull the plug.
Anything else in life, you got to figure it out, right?
Yeah. Rob, how about you? And if you could add, what does pulling the plug usually mean when you do it? Does that mean shelving a product, or what does that look like internally in a big company? But please to comment on some of those thoughts from Paul.
I think the process is similar to what Ram had talked about. You just, Bausch & Lomb does develop assets internally. And I think it's important to recognize what we do is risky. And we are going to fail, and usually more often than we're going to succeed. And so keeping that in mind, I always go back. I trained originally as a general surgeon. I go back to my original training and say, don't panic and look for treatable causes of disease, right? And so one of the things that's tough to sort out is failure and incompetence are different things. And sometimes they masquerade together. And so when you have a corporate failure like that, it's very important to sort out, now, which of this failure was generated by incompetence and something we did wrong versus, what is discovery and the risk of discovery. And so teasing those things out is tough. I think part of it is maintaining an open dialogue with your team. And understanding, again, what we do is risky.
How quickly are decisions made at that point once you've determined the proportionality of incompetence? Sorry to use it, but it's the correct term. how quickly are decisions made then on personnel or human resources? How does the company handle that?
Again, it all depends on the circumstances. Is it a chronic problem? Is it a one-time thing? But again, if you have talent, you try and retain it. People make mistakes too.
If it was
you
a
try not to, but
if it was a purchased acquisition, like Paul was alluding to, for either of you, and it's still, let's just say, an affiliate. You spoke of the ingenuity. Initially, it might have been a different relationship. Is it handled differently if it's on the outside like that versus fully on the inside, or is the process the same?
I think it's slightly different. So, for example, True Vision in Santa Barbara, we'd fly out there and as a team figure out what the problem was, and then try to figure out how to, start to correct that problem, have a plan in place very quickly before we come back and say, yeah, things are not going well, versus, just dumping that information on your bosses and then they start asking you, what are you going to do about it? But you got to be quick because bad news travels fast.
Final point, Rob. Paul mentioned devices. Do you think there's a difference in this regard with therapeutics versus device, or let's say drugs versus devices, or do you think they're similar?
I think the device business is a tough one. I think the overhead is high, and I think many other major strategics have drawn the same conclusion. Overhead's high, margins are narrow, tough business. Whereas I think the pharma business is more boom or bust. You go years and years and years without any kind of breakthrough, and then all of a sudden it's a boom where you've got a successful therapeutic. So they have very different kinetics and they're approached very differently.
Agree. Final topic, and briefly, and this is more broad. I'll ask each of you to comment on this, and it can be repetitive. We've had so much advance in retina in the last 15 years, and certainly in the last decade, it's just exploded. Where do you see the marketplace, the market, not just the new ideas, but where's the retina market going to be 5 or 6 years from now? Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, great discussions before that question on the panel. It's really invigorating to hear some of the thoughts of the panelists. I think I would start by saying, by the way, over the last 10 years, if we go back 5 years ago and we ask that same question, what people would have said, and go back 10 years, I think it would be really interesting to roll tape, right? Because there was an expectation on a number of fronts about things getting to market, and some surprises probably in the last 12 to 18 months on what got to market. So for us, I would say that I joined Outlook for a specific reason about what I think the next 5 years will look like, at least in part. And I do agree with Fred, if he's still here. It was a great point on share. I think people often want to say that there's an or in the market. It's either that or that. I think the new word will be and. And I think as we think of the future, it's going to be, for us, anti-VEGF has been an amazing therapy. Transformational. In all of medicine, I'm not sure there's such a remarkable success, if you really think about it. Restoring vision immediately. Now, the burden of care, yep, there's an honest conversation to be had there. But I think the future is about taking a core therapy in anti-VEGF. And I think of it a lot like prostaglandins are for glaucoma, that there's a certain core therapy, a utility that's there. And I think the question will be what surrounds that. Because even a lot of the innovation requires getting them dry, a patient. I'm speaking obviously of wet AMD specifically. Get them dry and then treat and extend longer durability and other things, and then adjuncts. Adjuncts, by their very definition, require this core therapy. So I do think there's a lot of promise in the future, but the bar has been set remarkably high with anti-VEGF. So I say that's going to be part of that 5-year future for sure. I think the question is what else comes around that, that we've talked about earlier today.
I agree. David?
Yeah, so I look at it this morning. I sat in and watched all the presentations, and us as an organization being a little bit newer to Retina, there's a lot going on here, right? So, and I'm certain that these meetings in the past, there's been a lot of great presentations just like today. But the one thing I did recognize is there is so much going on that there's no reason for an organization to not want to at least have conversations with somebody around what can we do together to put a little surround sound around what the real hot topics are moving forward for us that happens to be in the GA space. And then what, I look at it also, the economic conversation or the pricing conversation, number of products that are coming into the space, biosimilars, that it's going to get competitive in some areas as well. And how do we plan for all of that? Because in some cases, it's been one or two competitors. And how do we step in as a small company and be a part of that, be able to compete, and at the same time do what's right for patients along the way?
Thank you. Rob, your job is you're looking at the 20,000-foot view. You're in a big company that's looking down the road. What do you think?
I'm going to go with boring is the core of marriage. Again, I think one of the things that probably is the secret threshold in the room is what's somebody going to pay for. Again, it's not very sexy to talk about. It's something, it really is the limiting reagent of most of the deals we do. Does this conserve the original vision and do something that somebody's going to want? Not only want, but enough to pay for. And I think as time goes by, that threshold rises. And I think the bar for what does this compound or device need to do that's that much better gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think the future is really going to be driven in those conditions where there actually isn't a current option or not a good one, as opposed to I worry about the small incremental gains that just aren't going to get paid for.
It's a valid point. Ram, you've been around retina therapeutics and development for 20 years, or certainly near that. I've known you for most of those. Maybe nobody has the number of perspectives you've had on different marketplaces in retina therapeutics. What do you think 5 years from now?
You just made me really old.
No,
It's
it made me
fair,
really old
20
because I
years.
was already in practice for a while when we met.
I consider you young, and that makes me really upset.
I think I really resonated with what Fred said this morning, and Fred, some really good comments. I mean, before in the previous panel, I think the market in 5 years is going to be very segmented. There's going to be a clear dichotomy in terms of how you manage patients, in terms of their initial response to anti-VEGF and the type of frequency a phenotype will experience. And I think then you're going to make decisions on, with all these new options that are coming into play with long, durable outcomes, which one are you going to move those patients to? That hasn't been the case in retina to date, right? You take patients and you treat them, and then you start cutting down the frequency, and ultimately the patient loses vision. I mean, that's what the data shows, right? I think now you have an opportunity in the next 5 years where you have an opportunity to see which patient responds and how they respond and what type of frequency they need. And you'll have these options where you can give them a longer term solution. So I think the market's about to grow. I don't see this as a market where one is taken away from the other. I think most clinicians want to move those prevalent patients that are in your clinics today that are not getting the best outcomes to get the outcomes they need. And then there's going to be this first line option of intravitreal injections because you're trying to go through the response and frequency. And who will dominate that is really going to be based on the risk benefit we're going to see from most of these products that are coming to market over the next 5 years. And then same thing with things like PDS, things like we're doing, things like gray bug. All of these will have a risk benefit that will fit a phenotype of the patient. So it's good, and it's going to have a lot of options. It's going to turn into like oncology and a 5%, 2%, 3% market. And in the world of anti-VEGF is a very large market. And we have dry AMD coming into play now with people like Iveric Bio and what Apellis is trying to do. And once those products come to market, you've created the same cycle that you started with anti-VEGFs with dry AMD now. So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation there solving for that frequency.
To Rob's point, and payers may have a lot to say about how that market shapes up. We'll wait and see. Paul, you've had that and more experience on the device side, and to some extent therapeutics too. No, I said more experience. You've seen so many products come and go in the surgical side, devices. How about devices, if you want to speak to that specifically? Where do you see us going? I'm a surgeon. I'm interested in this.
I think, first of all, I'd say this panel was the nicest panel I've ever been on, to the point of irritation. And I was really looking forward to, actually, Jeff and I were going to team up on you about the companies that you've been with that haven't succeeded. We're really, you've got a little cloud over your head, and we're pulling for you, buddy. Okay. So
I gotta start hiring some panelists that are mean and nasty. What the hell?
yeah,
exactly.
So now
Craig,
let me go
make a
after
note.
Bosch and Long. So
to be mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Well, if you're
You
last.
could have been. I gave you the opportunity.
If
Use
you're-
the word
Start again.
incompetent. I let you go with that.
This is all-
The good thing is I was able to convince him to acquire those products.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The funny,
The consummate salesman.
the
Beautiful.
funny joke
If
is,
anyone's interested,
so I
Ram is
think I'm
selling a
winning
red
this race.
convertible.
well, I don't know. I actually invented one of the technologies that you didn't bring to market, so we got a little issue. But I now want to disagree with the gentleman from Bausch and Lomb because I am
Paul,
last.
You
and,
only have like 20 seconds.
I'm going. So,
How will I be operating?
so
in 5
I
years?
feel that number one, you should prioritize patients, and we will find money to pay for those things. We have a great surgeon, Maria Baracol, over here. She uses our 27 gauge system, but not everybody does. We're going to make 27 gauge so good, they'll pay for it. The tamponades for our patients are going to get better, reduce the number of reoperations due to that, and reduce PVR. I think that we're going to have digital robotic visualization in the near future. And then on the longer term, you're going to have optogenetics, you're going to have CRISPR technology, and I think even sooner than that, you're going to have stem cells for RPE and photoreceptors, and that's another thing for geographic atrophy. So
So is a robot going to replace me at some point?
yes,
Well, that's good because I noticed you looked at me when you said reoperation. I was a little
Hey.
concerned about that.
if the knife fits, wear it, you know.
I think we're going to conclude there because this could get really bad in a few minutes.
I'm
We're
just
sort
getting
of
warmed
on
up.
time.
Yeah.
Paul's just getting warmed up. This has been amazing. Thank you, all of you, for coming on and sharing and being so honest. It concludes the meeting, but please come outside and have a drink. I guess it's in the lobby, snacks and drinks, and everyone can have a laugh or two. Paul will be holding court in the far corner. Thank you.
Tip your waitresses.
I love